The Silent Bells, Chapter 1. Too Many Dragons. North of Mexico, south of Canada, on a stone jetty stretching out from the moonlit banks of the freshwater sea called Lake Michigan, below the gaping stone ruin of the Order of Brendan's Ashtown estate, there was a girl standing as rigid and frozen as a pole. Her short hair was darker than the night sky above her, and cinched back tight enough to be painful. Dry blood encrusted a small bandage high on her brow, which she should have removed days ago. Her arms were crossed over a leather jacket, belted with a revolver on one hip and a long black knife on the other. Her cheeks were wet, but she did not wipe them. Her vision was blurred, but she did not blink. No matter how hard she tried, Antigone Smith could not see the future. She couldn't even see tomorrow. Moon-silvered waves slapped at the stones beneath her feet with a cheerfulness that Antigone found disrespectful. How could the wind and water carry on like nothing had happened, like the world hadn't changed? How could the moon and stars remain unaffected? Rupert Greaves was dead. It couldn't be real, but it was. His breathing had stopped with a long sigh, barely more than 3 hours ago. His big, tense body, swathed in bandages, had sagged into the small hospital mattress like mud, completely relaxing for the first time since Antigone had met him. Antigone had grabbed his heavy, scarred hand. She had shaken his shoulders. She had screamed for help. She had slapped his face and thumped her fist on his chest before collapsing on top of him in grief. And she had remained there until the others had pulled her away. Only a few nurses remained at Ashtown, and they had all tried everything to wake Rupert, to rekindle life in the man who had always been too willing to die for anyone. And then broad Alan Livingston had spoken solemn words of departing that Antigone had been unwilling to hear, and he had raised the white sheet over Rupert's dark face. Alan's blond sons, George and Silas, had both looked startled by the brokenness of their father's quaking voice. Antigone drew in a long, lake-chilled breath and bit her lip in anger. The pain and the salty taste of blood on her tongue spoke for her fury better than any words could. Her keeper, the last blood avenger of the Order of Brendan, the Evangel, and the closest thing to a living father that she and Cyrus had left, was now gone. Antigone wanted to yell at him. She wanted to kick him in the shins until he knew how furious she was. How could he quit on her? And now, of all times, with Cyrus missing and Ashtown smashed, if Rupert was going to die, he should have done it when the trans-mortals had pinned him like a butterfly to the great wooden door in the hall, and Babbed Catha, that horrifying skull-faced storm crow, had probed his chest with 2 long black talons. Dying then would have been understandable. Or when Brother Niffy hadn't noticed the knife in Rupert's side and had dropped him on it while trying to get him down from the door. Antigone could have channeled her rage at Niffy if Rupe had died then. He could have died after the first awful infection or the second fever, but not this. Not now. Not after 3 weeks. While Antigone had been sitting with him, watching his steady breathing, and telling him about her day and tomorrow's fears, not after she had finally stopped worrying and praying, not after the big man had opened his eyes and looked at her with a smile, not after he had begun to speak again. No defeat in death. His voice had been low, but stronger than a whisper, and then, just like that, he'd been gone. "No," Antigone said aloud. "No, no, no!" It was inexcusable. Fresh tears spilled down into the corners of her mouth, down over her jaw, down her neck. She turned her face up toward the stars and sniffed. No! Rupert was wrong, and she had never been angrier at him. Why would he say that? No defeat in death? Maybe not for him, but this was defeat. This was the end. For her, for Ashtown, for the Order of Brendan, for Cyrus, wherever he was, even if he did make it back alive. There had been too many friends wrapped in sheets in the chapel already, and now, with Rupert ready to join them, hope itself had died. The Ordo Draconis had invaded Ashtown with a mob of transmortals that had risen up through the burial of Babdcatha. The cost had been high, but the dragons had been repelled. Now, with Rupert gone and Cyrus and the Dragon's Tooth absent, a handful of transmortals could waltz through the front door and finish what they had started with no trouble at all. And how long would it take Radu Bey to realize that fact? There were too few defenders and too many dead. Robert Boone, Gunner, John Horace Lawney VII, the captain. Nolan had yet to open his eyes since throwing his body over Cyrus, when Wrath, the stone giant, had exploded into shrapnel. Jax had been crushed by a stone and was now in a wheelchair. Jeb had shattered his leg. Diana had somehow survived broken ribs that had punctured her lung. Niffy had burns and gashes on every bit of visible skin. Antigone, Dennis Gilly, Big Ben Sterling, and little Hilary Drake had been the only mortals to get through the sacking of Ashtown without major bodily harm or disappearing through the burials like Cyrus. And that simple fact added to Antigone's anger as much as any loss. Standing on the jetty, with all her limbs working and her lungs and heart fully functional, Antigone felt dirty, guilty, profoundly alone. She should be the one hurt or dead or gone. Rupert and the others should still be here. If Rupert could hear her right now, she'd call him an idiot and beg him to come back. Didn't he understand how much she needed him? How much they all did? Why would he do that? Antigone sniffed her weepy sinuses empty, and because she was so very alone on the end of the stone jetty beneath the moon, she spat into the water. How very Cyrus of me, she thought. And as she did, a silent shape slid through the darkness above her, as silent as an owl, but much, much bigger. Antigone instinctively pulled back the hammer on her revolver, while the shape banked in front of the moon, revealing itself to be a triangular plane with blunt corners. Bank completed, the plane touched down on the lake's surface, skipping toward her until it stopped no more than 50 yards away, sending a flock of foaming waves to break on the stones beneath Antigone's feet. Still silent, the craft crept all the way to the jetty and dropped an anchor from its tail. By the light of the moon, the plane looked to be made entirely of pale wood planks. A cockpit hatch opened, and a large man climbed out under the wing and threw a coiled rope at Antigone. Instinctively, she grabbed it, crouched, and tied it off to a thick iron ring. When she rose again, the man was on the jetty beside her. Antigone knew not to show fear. She also knew that this man was no mere mortal. She had every reason to be afraid. He was dressed in something like a leather kilt below a thick woolly sweater, much too heavy for a late summer night. He wore boots almost to his knees, capped with bulging woolly socks. A rigid beard that might be blonde and might be white reached down to his chest, but the skin on his brow and his cheeks looked smooth and young. The sides of his square head were shaved, and a braid as thick as Antigone's arm jutted down between his shoulder blades. He was leaner than Gilgamesh, Antigone's reference point for large transmortals, but maybe only an inch or two shorter. Antigone only stood up to his short ribs, but her gun was cocked and ready, and the moon sparkle in the big man's eyes seemed more like laughter than aggression. "I expected no greeting," the man said, and his voice vibrated her bones like a foghorn, but with the cheerful confidence of a bugle. "I'll need a meal and a bed, but guide me to the captain first. Words before food." "I'm sorry," Antigone said. "Who are you?" The man laughed. "Bold doorkeepers these days. But I suppose the small ones can be allowed some brass in strange times. I am called Wiglaf, the Skilfing, by those who know, and I answer to the captain's call, though by the looks of the rubble up on that hill, I seem to have missed the battle." "Yes," Antigone said, "you did. Radu Bey and his stupid order of dragons smashed us with bombs before opening a portal into one of the burials and invading Ashtown from below. I'm afraid the captain is dead." She lowered the hammer on her revolver as a sign of goodwill, but the man paid no mind. "I'm Antigone Smith, by the way, which means you probably hate me. Not that it matters anymore." "I have no cause to hate Smiths, although I hear many do." The man gripped his beard in a thoughtful fist. "But the captain does not die. I am not calling you a liar, but how can that be?" The transmortals cut the charmed piece of cloak out of his chest and then cut off his head. A groan rumbled out of Wiglaf's chest. Grim news indeed. My hunger fades. Which of the foul beasts did it? And do you know which burial was opened? Have forces inspected the portal?" Antigone hesitated for a moment. She had no reason to trust this strange man who had just landed a silent wooden plane on the lake well after midnight. But then again, she had no reason not to. Rupert was dead. What else mattered? "The portal closed," she said. "But not before my little brother disappeared through it to no one knows where. The burial was Babbed Catha's, one of the oldest, and they just blew it open. So many transmortals came out. Too many, all following Radu in and out of his dragon form. He killed the captain. One of us killed a transmortal called Cressens, and Cyrus killed some lady called Anon the Morrigan, and Babbed Catha too." "Babbed? The Stormcrow herself? Killed? Not captured or buried?" Wiglaf cocked his large head like a small child coping with confusion. "Killed," Antigone repeated. "My brother, Cyrus, had the dragon's tooth. He cut off Babbed's skull when this kind of thick and very crazy Irish monk jumped on her back and she fell on top of Sai. Then Sai went after Radu, or Azazel, the dragon. He even chopped off the fork in the dragon's tongue. That's when Radu and his mob bolted. Cyrus jumped on the dragon's tail and rode along." Wiglaf burst into a laugh that hurt Antigone's ears. "This little brother who is now gone, he took Babbed's head and Azazel's lies? I shall mind myself around that one. Oh, I have missed much." Wiglaf's voice rose and fell like the waves around him. "The slaying of Babbed Catha deserves a song and a bard and a month of feasting. Many weeks more to mark the brave captain's loss. He is a brother I will mourn, though his curse is finally lifted. There is more to this tale, and I will hear it all inside over a full plate and a foaming mug. Take me to the young Avengel, the fearless one with the serious face. They called him Greaves." Antigone sagged. She opened her mouth to speak, but instead her lungs quaked and her throat closed, and new tears sprang into her eyes. "Oh," Wiglaf said, "I am sorry, small one." He set a lead-heavy hand on her shoulder. "He was also lost in the battle?" "After," Antigone said. "Tonight, just hours ago." "Tonight?" Wiglaf asked. He looked at the moon, gauging its height above the horizon. "Tonight is still young. Stop your tears and take me to his bed. I would look on his body." Not all rain is created equal. Afternoon monsoons flush desert canyons with the flashiest of floods. Dew and drizzle turn mountain ranges green with sheer persistence. Tropical cloud forests remain lush, with nothing but the constant touch of cold, barely beaded vapor. All falling and floating moisture is impressive, but the jungle monsoon is more potent than all its precipitous brothers and sisters. In the jungle, entire lakes fall daily from the sky, raining down in bullet armies nearly infinite in number, punching through thick green leaves, pummeling dark soil, and soaking every crawling thing that lives below. Those are the torrents that give the rainforests their simple but honest name. Cyrus Smith had never been in a real rainforest before, and he never wanted to be in one again. He was tired of being wet. His skin had known the cool, damp air of Northern California, crisped by the ocean and fog-chilled in the mornings. He had grown used to the sticky summer days of Wisconsin. But now, through no fault of his own, he knew the jungle's moods: wet in the morning, steaming and impossibly sticky by midday, drowning in deluge every afternoon. 3 weeks. That's how long Cyrus had been trudging north through thick and endless jungle green, climbing mountains, sliding through sandy mud, crashing through lush undergrowth, crawling up vine-encased slopes. 3 weeks spent sheltering from the rains every afternoon, pitching leaf tents over massive tree roots that were often patrolled by feisty ants or wasps. 3 weeks since he had regained consciousness with a fit little gymnast in a baggy mail carrier uniform looking down at him with a symmetrical cut on each cheek. And the only reason he hadn't died after chasing Radu Bey back into his grisly lair and then fleeing out of a portal into the hillside jungle temple made of bones was because that mail girl, aptly named Mercy, had tucked the dragon's tooth and its broken bamboo shaft handle into Cyrus's limp hands while he had been unconscious. Death hadn't been possible while he held the tooth. Cyrus struggled to make sense of what had come before the jungle. He thought he remembered most of the battle in Ashtown. At least, he remembered waking the brothers below and watching Wrath and Justice hurl transmortals around like toys and sling Phoenixes reborn out over Ashtown's walls like small stones. Until Babbed Katha had blown Wrath up like a 10-ton stone grenade. He remembered snatching the dragon's tooth from Oliver's hands and the powerless slap of bullets punching through his chest right afterward. But he didn't remember what Oliver had done or where he had gone. Cyrus remembered seeing Rupert pinned to a wooden door and Diana hurt on the ground. He remembered how the black-bladed weapons had come to life in his hands when he held the tooth. He remembered the crow-feathered skull monster's talons digging into his shoulder and piercing his throat before Niffy had jumped on her back and Cyrus had lopped her head from her shoulders. Those wounds from Bab's black talons were the only ones that still hurt him, throbbing in his throat and shoulder whenever he used his left arm. After Babbed, when Cyrus had chased the Radu dragon down into the burials, he struggled to piece the sequence of memories together in a way that made sense to him. The dragon had kept hurling fire from the tip of his spiked tail, which had been distracting. But Cyrus thought he remembered the dragon dragging him through deep water and through a shattered stone wall into a burial with a doorway in one wall that opened into a room built of living bodies. In that room he had found mercy on an altar made of men. In that room there had been other doorways, one of which apparently led to a jungle and dampness without end. When asked, Mercy had been unwilling to discuss the room made of bodies, but her reaction told Cyrus that it had not been a dream or an hallucination. Radu Bey used living people like bricks in the walls of his lair, and the temple in the jungle that Cyrus and Mercy had careened into had been made of stacked skeletons. Or perhaps they had only become skeletons with time. Perhaps Radu, or someone like him, had built that place with living walls as well long ago. Cyrus dug the toe of his soggy boot into a steep, muddy slope and scrambled upward, clawing at the dirt with broken fingernails until his hands found a vine. His keys banged against his collarbone, strung around his neck on invisible Patricia. With the vine's help, Cyrus crested the slope and sat down on a narrow ridge with his legs out in front of him. He was panting and dripping sweat, and the snapped bamboo handle on the dragon's tooth dug into his stomach, but he was too tired to adjust it. To his left, the ridge rose into a high peak. To his right, it did the same. He was perched in the bottom of a V, but directly in front of him, the slope, almost a cliff, fell out of sight into a deep valley. Across the valley, more mountains, more jungle, more wet, all the way to the horizon. 3 weeks of exhaustion, of confusion, of frustration, of wet, made Cyrus wonder if death might have been a more comfortable option. Giant dragonflies, even bigger than those that Rupert trained at Ashtown, had shown themselves at first, when Cyrus and Mercy had still been near the temple, made of stacked skeletons, where they had tumbled into this place. The dragonflies were mostly red or green, with wingspans 3 feet across. But Cyrus had seen 2 blue dragonflies that were significantly larger, closer to 5 feet across, and with abdomens thicker than his arm. Once he'd heard and then watched a big blue dragon hover while loudly munching on a parrot. The bird's vivid green feathers had fluttered down from the jungle canopy into Cyrus's hair, but he hadn't seen or heard another one of the insects after the first couple of days of hiking, and he didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, because he didn't know if the insects had a master. At least they hadn't been interested in eating 2 exhausted North Americans. Cyrus knew the insects could have stripped him to the bone if they had wanted to. Back in Ashtown, Rupert had fed his dragonflies whole chicken carcasses, but the chickens had to be launched into the air to get the dragonflies interested. And once launched, not one of them ever hit the ground until they snowed down in little flurries of splintered bones. When the big dragon insects were on patrol, it was a brave bird that dared to enter Ashtown airspace. Cyrus spat down between his feet and tried to wipe the sweat off of his brow onto his sleeve, but his sleeve was already soaked. He had just added more dirt to his face and more salt to his already stinging eyes. Behind him, Cyrus could hear Mercy's short gasps as she scrambled up the steep slope. Cyrus blinked his burning eyes at the sun just above the mountain on his left. He still didn't know where they were exactly, but he'd guessed at a few things. They had to be close to the equator. Day after day, the sun rose and set near the middle of the horizon, with only the slightest variation, and the Southern Cross was strong in the sky every clear night. Cyrus was also pretty sure they were still in the Western Hemisphere, which meant Central or South America. This conclusion was based entirely on sloths. He was pretty sure sloths weren't African or Asian, and he'd seen dozens of long-clawed mossy fur bags in the trees over the last couple of weeks, although he'd absolutely refused to eat one. Killing a sloth seemed like a nasty thing to do, even for two kids stranded in the jungle scrounging for protein. The animals were just too slow for eating them, to be fair, and when he'd gotten close enough to one of the smelly little guys to think about it, the animal had looked straight into his eyes like a sad puppet, wondering if Cyrus was going to pick up his strings and help him move. When Cyrus had told Mercy this, she had laughed at him. When he told her which hemisphere he thought they were in, she had asked why it mattered. It didn't, not really, but he had found it just a tiny bit encouraging. It meant they could walk all the way home without a boat, if they just kept heading north and then followed the coast. It was technically possible. Even if it took a year, the land could get them there. Mercy had not found that thought encouraging at all. "Hey!" Mercy gasped behind him. It was the first word she'd spoken to Cyrus since breakfast. "Hand, please." The first time she'd asked for help that week. Cyrus leaned back and held out his arm. Mercy grabbed his wrist tight and surged up, dropping to the ground beside him. Side by side they stared at fold upon fold of jungle hills and ridge lines and mountain tops all the way to the horizon. The slope in front of them would be another brutal descent. The slope across from them would take an entire day or two. "Bad word," Mercy said. Cyrus didn't respond. The pretend curse had been funny the first time Mercy had used it 20 days ago. Now, not so much. "You know," Mercy added after a moment, "talking won't hurt you." "Nothing to say," Cyrus said. "You have to be thinking about something." "Do I?" "You do." Cyrus shrugged. "You could always tell me more about that place of bodies." Cyrus waited. "How'd you get there? Why on earth did you ever go inside? What were you thinking? What did Radu Bey say to you?" Mercy didn't answer. "Right," Cyrus said. "Well, let me know when you feel like helping me figure out what's going on and how we got here." A raindrop the size of a bird's egg slapped Cyrus on the knee. Two more followed. Drops began drumming slow percussion on wide green leaves all around. The percussion would not remain slow for long. "Bad word," Cyrus said. "Rain's early. We need shelter." "None up here," Mercy said. Thunder broke like a wave above them, spilling echoes between the ridge lines. On cue, an entire ocean of water began to fall. Patricia hated the rain as much as Cyrus did. He could feel her adjusting herself higher and tighter around his neck, sheltering under his jaw. Cyrus pushed himself off the ground and tried to hop to his feet. His right leg worked fine, but his left heel plowed downhill, slipping through sandy mud. "Cy!" Mercy grabbed the back of his shirt, and his weight jerked her to her feet. For half a heartbeat, Cyrus thought he might be fine. And then he heard his shirt tear. Cyrus dropped into a baseball slide, left leg out, right leg bent, with his foot tucked beneath him. Roots and stones tore at the back of his legs, while branches and leaves lashed at his face. Wide leafy plants snapped as Cyrus picked up speed. He dragged his fingers through the slick mud on both sides, but the slope was too steep and getting steeper. Ahead it completely disappeared over a cliff. "Bad word," Cyrus thought. "Bad, bad, bad, bad." Before the cliff's edge, Cyrus twisted onto his stomach, digging his knees and toes into the slope, clawing with his fingers, which is why he launched backward off of the cliff's edge, arms and legs flailing. Well, Cyrus thought, maybe this is simpler. He didn't notice that he was yelling. The rain seemed to slow down around him. Or was that time itself slowing down? Or just Cyrus falling as fast as the rain? Could the dragon's tooth keep him from splattering on stone? Mounted in the cliff face 50 feet below the edge, a net had been strung across a fence of twisted poles. Cyrus almost tore through it on impact, snapping one of the poles, launching another pole down the cliff to its doom, and punching his right leg through the net up to his hip. Mud and stones poured down after him while he bobbed and swayed in place, so tangled and bound that he couldn't even look down to see what was below him. A moment later, Mercy tumbled off the cliff above him in a spill of mud and rock and leaves. Mud reached Cyrus's face. A stone hit him in the thigh, but Mercy flipped and landed cleanly on her back in the net, about 10 feet from Cyrus. Another pole snapped. The entire net swung down, banging Cyrus upside down against the cliff face. The bottom was still hundreds of feet down on a lush valley floor striped with a meandering silver stream. It looked like a pretty place to die, if only it hadn't been raining. As Cyrus's head pounded with blood, a waterfall across from him came into focus. It was so tall that the water disappeared into vapor before it reached the bottom. "Mercy?" he asked. "Yeah," she grunted. "You alive?" "Barely," she said. "You okay?" "Been worse," Cyrus answered. "I think. And I know where we are, I think." An enormous jewel-blue dragonfly rose up through the rain on throbbing wings until it hovered eye to upside-down eye with Cyrus. The insect cocked its melon-sized head and clicked thorny metallic jaws. The wind from its wings battered Cyrus's face, and he closed his eyes. The thing might decide to eat him, but Cyrus didn't have to watch it happen. Antigone stood at the foot of Rupert's hospital bed, with Wiglaf beside her. In the light, Wiglaf's beard was clearly blonde, even if ghostly. The braid down his back was darker. Jeb Boone, using just one crutch, hopped into the already crowded room, working his way around the wall until he stood beside his younger sister. Diana hadn't eaten much since burying her father, and Antigone thought her freckled cheekbones were growing more pronounced every day. She'd talked to Jeb about it. No one else had a chance of getting Diana to do anything, although even he might not have much of a chance. Diana was still recovering from a concussion and a punctured lung, along with the losses of her father, Cyrus, and now Rupert. Pain filled Diana's normally sparkling eyes. It had been days since her freckled, sun-browned face had managed a believable smile. Brother Boniface Brosnan stood at the head of Rupert's bed with his thick arms crossed, and his best niffy sneer directed up at Wiglaf, a sneer that had not wavered since Antigone and the transmortal had first entered the hospital room, interrupting the monk's prayers. The sleeves of Niffy's robe were rolled up high, and his mohawk still patchy around the oozy scalp burns and blackened scabs that the fearless monk had earned in the battle for Ashtown. "What's going on?" Alan Livingston banged into the small room like an elephant, a small elephant next to Wiglaf. "Sir, who are you, and by whose authority do you disturb this bedside?" Wiglaf didn't answer. Instead, he gripped the bottom of the sheet covering Rupert's body and jerked it free. Crumpling the sheet into a ball, he tossed it into Alan's chest. Rupert's dark and once powerful torso was clothed only in scars and bandages. At the shoulder, around his ribs, his wrists, his biceps. Below the waist, he wore the bright white button-flapped pajama bottoms given to every patient in Ashtown's hospital wing. The black boat crest of Brendan was crudely stenciled on the hip. "Bandages off," Wiglaf said. "All of them." Drawing a knife from his kilt pouch, Wiglaf began to slice bandages off of Rupert's feet. Dropping the stained cloths on the floor, he inspected the wounds. "Fine," Wiglaf said, and moved up to Rupert's side. "We can do this properly later," Alan said. Wiglaf ignored him. "The Skilfing, is it?" Niffy asked. "Wiglaf, you expect me to believe that you lugged your Norse carcass all the way here from Greenland just to help us dress the body?" Antigone knew Niffy's mood, and she understood it. Like the Irishman he was, Niffy was looking for a fight. Any fight, even one he would quickly lose. "The captain sent me a seagull," Wiglaf said. But I am difficult to reach, even for a bird, and that difficulty was by the captain's own design. I came when I learned of need. I came to help old friends, as I can. The monk uncrossed his blistered arms and moved toward the much bigger man. I'll thank you to step back, mate. Let the ones who loved their avengal dress the man for his grave. You're a fool, Wiglaf said. I owe Greaves a debt I could not soon forget. I will pay what I can now. Show me where the storm crow struck him. Storm crow? Jeb asked. Babbed Catha, Antigone said. She moved up to the side of the bed. Right here. She reached for the bandages that swathed Rupert's shoulder and chest. Peeling them up, she revealed 2 open craters in Rupert's flesh, surrounded with overlapping halos of dead gray skin almost a foot across. Wiglaf sagged at the sight. What have you done with the crow's body? Burned it, Niffy answered, on a pyre in the courtyard with the other villain dead. Her head? Wiglaf pulled at his beard and then poked the brittle skin around Rupert's wound. Please tell me you did not burn the feathered skull. We set it in the collections below, Ellen said from beside the door, beside the skull of a giant also slain with the Reaper's blade long ago. Wiglaf clenched his fist slowly until 2 knuckles popped like tree branches. Did no one tell you? He asked. Have you nothing in your libraries of that devil's power? Babbed Catha does not remain dead. She claims another's body, as she has done often enough before. Her spirit will grow in your avengel until his skull is bare and sprouting feathers, until he draws breath only to serve the demon. Wiglaf backed away from the bed and turned to leave the room. Wait, Antigone said. Please, what do we do? What you should have done weeks ago when you first knew the source of his wound, Wiglaf said. If you wanted to see him live again, and live steered by his own will, if you want this wound to stop spreading before it enslaves his corpse, you must grind the storm crow's skull to meal and let it nourish living creatures, fish, birds, anything. She may rise again, but not here, not now, and not in him. But you said tonight was still young. Antigone fought to keep her voice from breaking. You asked to see him. I thought you were going to help him. Wake him up. Wake up? Alan Livingstone stepped beside Antigone and slid his heavy arm around her shoulders. Little sister, your keeper is now more awake than we. He walks green fields far from here, with his face toward the warmest sun of all. He may, Wiglaf said, and he may not. He has not yet been gone 3 nights. He could still be roused by some among his fellow creatures. But even if I rouse this man from his stillness, and his soul turns back from the journey, that rot in his chest will only kill him again within the hour. That would be cruelty, not healing. And I have not the knowledge, the touch, nor the faith to turn back the storm crow's touch and mend what she has marred. Well, if you don't, Antigone said, who does?